Okay. So I asked you over Easter to do this American history interpretation task, looking at a passage from John O'Farrell's book, History of Britain, focusing specifically on the American War of Independence. It is a good book. I would highly recommend any of you interested in reading some sort of more humorous approach to history. However, what is interesting about it is this passage. Now, this passage is deliberately meant to be slightly different to what we think of, and so what I thought I'd do is actually go through it a little bit and see what kind of things you might have come up with. Because most of you actually looking at your work was fairly good, and actually this is a really important skill that you do need to have for your coursework. So we've got to look at 5 different things he said, and really what I wanted you to do was think about what it is he's actually saying and how you might justify whether it's correct or not, and using your own opinion, because actually that's what you've got to do in your coursework. You've got to take a historian's opinion, and you've then got to say, well, actually, this is correct or this isn't correct, and you've got to be able to argue it. Just because a historian says it doesn't mean that it's right, and you're going to show that in your coursework. So let's go to the first one. So he talks about there we go. Local insurgents hell-bent on causing anarchy and destruction. So he says the full sentence in the American colonies, local insurgents hell-bent on causing anarchy and destruction began the cowardly attacks on the British peacekeeping forces. So the second part of the sentence we'll come up to in a minute. But this first part, local insurgents are being hell-bent on causing anarchy and destruction. So you've got to say to yourself, actually, what part of this statement is true? What part of it isn't true? And how can I prove it is or is not true? That's what we're trying to do here. So first thing we've got to look at is this idea. Are these insurgents local? Are these people that are causing problems for the British, rebelling against the British, are they local? Actually, they are. But it's the second part that's actually really interesting. Are they hell-bent on causing anarchy and destruction? Well, actually, they're not. This idea of anarchy, destruction, if that was the case, they would walk in, big groups would go into towns and destroy as much as they could. But they're not. There is a form of destruction, but it's very focused, and it's focused on the British. Now, you look at the Boston Tea Party. If this was local insurgents helping on causing anarchy and destruction, yep, Boston Tea Party, you can say there is that element of destruction to it, but why stop there? Why not destroy someone else's boats? Why not destroy people's houses, burn down their houses? Where's the anarchy and destruction there? There isn't. The Boston Tea Party is a very specific response to a very specific act. These people do want to cause destruction, but it's mainly towards the British, and they don't want to just cause destruction without an end in sight. For a lot of the time, this destruction is caused or is being done because it's in response to something. So you look at the Boston Tea Party. Well, actually, you can tell this is in response to something else, and that's your evidence. You've got to say, well, actually, if you're looking at a tea act, and you can look at any act, actually, you can say, look, these are the different acts. This is why this happened. If you talk about causing anarchy and destruction, well, actually, talk about the Continental Congress. That's not anarchy. That's not destruction. But actually, it's about response. So are they local insurgents? Yes, they are. But actually, are they helping on causing anarchy and destruction? Well, you can actually really justify, they're not. And you could say, look, they do damage a lot of things. The Boston Tea Party, again, is a good example of damage caused. So there is one element to it, but it's a very simplistic view to just say, look, here is damage caused. They'd caused it, therefore this statement is true. You've got to take it that bit further if you want to show proper evidence. Now, the second part of this sentence is began the cowardly attacks on British peacekeeping forces. Now, this is quite tricky because it requires you to understand what we mean by peacekeeping forces in a modern sense. And actually what we mean by British peacekeeping forces, and you hear about this in modern conflicts, is you will find a conflict between two groups of people somewhere. And you have that conflict, but you will send an outside force to try and make sure they keep the peace. So if you look at places like Rwanda, Bosnia, we didn't get a peacekeeping force in Syria more recently, but essentially you would have, for this to be a peacekeeping force, you would essentially need to have some states fighting with other states, or landowners versus businessmen. And the British are coming in and saying to both sides, look, we're not fighting against you, but we are ensuring that you don't fight with each other. We are keeping the peace. So once you've thought about that, you then have that starts making sense as to actually, are the British there as a peacekeeping force? And if that's the case, if they are a peacekeeping force, then there is justification that anybody attacking a peacekeeping force is actually quite a cowardly act. But that is if they are a peacekeeping force. And so on one hand, you say, look, they refuse to fight openly in lots of cases. Now, when you get into the War of Independence, yeah, they did fight. They did fight pitched battles. So, Trenton, Princeton. But I mean, even some of those, they're not just standing there face to face with the British. They're trying to do things in a way that works for them. So you say, look, their attacks, their sort of guerrilla warfare attacks, especially using local knowledge, the people who understand the land, they know the land. You might say that, but actually, there's more of that than this. There is no way that a lot of these armies, a lot of these militiamen, a lot of these Minutemen could actually fight toe to toe with the British Army. So their attacks have to be done in a way that works for them. The British Army know that the best chance for them is pitched open battles against the colonists because they will win. So on one hand, you go, look, there's two parts. One, this isn't a peacekeeping force. The British are occupiers and they are rulers. They are not a peacekeeping force. And you can say, look, the only reason they are attacking is because the British have not listened to their pleas for fairer taxation, more openness with trading to other people. This has been forced upon them. So yeah, there is arguments. You say, look, this is the way that they fought, the way that they treated the British was actually quite cowardly. But how do you justify that with evidence? It's much easier to say, actually, look, no, the British are not a peacekeeping force. But also, these insurgents were doing what they needed to win and to survive. And it was British policy that forced them into this position. You look at the mercantilist policy, there were some colonies, some businesses, some industries that really struggled because of mercantilism. It would not allow them to be as successful as they could be. And actually, you say, well, this was sort of forced upon them. Move to the next one. Being thousands of miles from home, the British Army bravely refused to cut and run. So, are they being brave by not retreating? Are they not being brave by running away? And actually, we look at this and say, could they actually cut and run? Could they just walk away from the colonies? And there's certain things you have to think about here. What's the wider impact to the whole of the British Empire? If you get some insurgency and the British say, right, well, yeah, we don't like this, we're going home. It doesn't set a good precedence for the rest of the empire. What are they protecting? They're protecting their influence, they're protecting their trade, they're protecting control over sort of timber supplies. You think of that, the importance of the colonies in regards sort of to timber, lumber, those sorts of industries in the north, but also sort of cotton, rice, tobacco. The British Army, this isn't just about battles. This isn't just about fighting. This is about sort of economic dominance over countries like France and Spain as well. So could they actually cut and run? No, they couldn't. Think about what they were protecting, the importance of what they were protecting. This is a really interesting one. The fragile peace so desperately desired by the vast majority of peace-loving settlers. I mean, did those people who were insurgents, who were militiamen, who joined the Continental Army, were they going against what peace-loving settlers wanted? And this is a really interesting one because this is probably one of these ones that you can argue both ways quite well with evidence. So if you're looking, you say, well, actually, how many people joined the Continental Army? What is the population of these states and how many of them fight in that army? It's a very small percentage. Now, people weren't necessarily against the army, but so you could argue and say, look, very few people actually joined that army. They wanted peace. They didn't want to go to war. They just wanted peace to get on with their lives. And that is one way you can look at it. But actually, when you really get into this and go a bit deeper, you're looking at the other side of it. I mean, were people happy with British rule? In certain places, you can say maybe they weren't happy, but they were accepting of it. In certain places further south, but in the north, were they happy? Not necessarily. And in lots of places, Massachusetts especially, they definitely weren't. And you can justify this by looking at the creation of a Continental Congress. You can look at sort of ratification of the Constitution. There are times when people are voting on these matters. They are sending representatives, and the representatives are voting of declaring independence from Britain, declaring war, on fighting a war, on allying with the French, on accepting a constitution. Just because a lot of these people don't want to fight face to face with the British does not mean they want a fragile peace and the status quo. A lot of them that don't. A lot of them do want independence. They do want independence from Britain, and they want control. Especially when we go back to the beginning of the course and you look at the impact of taxation, the sort of economic influence of Britain, the economic control of Britain. That doesn't mean people are happy. And it's that evidence that you need to say, actually, no, this statement is not correct. And the last one, the actions of these militias was terrorism, pure and simple. Now, this is looking at it from a modern perspective. So we've got to take that into consideration. But again, if you saw something like this in regards to your coursework, you could look at that and say, actually, is this person correct or not? I mean, and you look at this and you say, well, is this terrorism? What are they attacking? Who are they targeting? And it brings us back to one of the points we made earlier about the Boston Tea Party. But you think, these militias, they started off with the sort of town militias and Minutemen. Now, these aren't going from one town off to New York, to Boston, to Philadelphia. They are not going to those cities and, creating sort of terror activities. They're not. They are defensive. They are normal people, and when the British come into their town, they defend their town. They're not offensive. They're not trying to be offensive here. They're being defensive. So was the action of these militias was terrorism pure and simple? It's actually not really. They were trying to protect themselves. And again, we go back to things like the Boston Tea Party. You look at certain events where Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party are two really good examples. You can look and say, well, actually, was this people who just said, we want to scare the British, let's just go and cause mayhem, let's just go and kill people, let's just go and destroy things. Actually, you can trace it back and go, these are people who are unhappy. And there is a reason for their unhappiness. And the reason for their unhappiness invariably ends up with some form of British policy. And you tie it back. Again, so you look at something and you say, well, why are people angry about this? Well, actually, here is your policy. Here is your act. This is why they're angry. This is why they do what they do. And again, what this doesn't take into account, the action of these militias was terrorism pure and simple. Well, there's a defensive aspect, but also you see that there's a political element that ties in to this as well. So this isn't just about pure terror. There's a sort of political freedom to it.